We are now starting our series on the Twilight Zone, where me, TVAnthologyReviews, is going to review every single episode of the original Twilight Zone series that premiered from 1959 to 1964 on CBS. That's a total of 156 episodes, and I'm going to try to finish this series in under a year. We'll see how it goes. Maybe a year and a half. The Twilight Zone was actually not the first anthology show to specialize in science fiction. There were others before it. Tales of Tomorrow from 51 to 53. Radio programs like Weird Circle and Dimension X. Out There from 51 to 52. But it is the most well known. It shows what happens to an anthology show when there's a brilliant guiding hand. In this case, Rod Serling, who was involved in writing 92 of the 156 Twilight Zone episodes. That's why this has such a good feel and consistent tone throughout the entire series, because he is there every step of the way. I just covered Tales from the Dark Side, just created by George A. Romero. George A. Romero was involved in 3 episodes of Tales from the Dark Side. He was basically nowhere to be seen. If he had been like Rod Serling and been intimately involved in every single episode of Tales from the Dark Side, the results would have been so much better. He mixes morality, science fiction, fantasy, and horror into tales that stand the test of time and have been preserved very well. I'm recording this off the DVD set, where you can get the entire set for around $30 to $40. Rod Serling got a start writing films such as Patterns, The Rack, and his most well-known film, Planet of the Apes, that came out in '68. In the first official episode, Where Is Everybody, that premiered on October 7th, 1959. Now, there was one episode before this. The precursor to the Twilight Zone was a teleplay that Rod Serling wrote called The Time Element, which actually is available, and I will be reviewing it later. And that got such a good reception when it premiered on CBS in November 24th of 1958 that they wanted Rod Serling to produce more episodes, so he created The Twilight Zone. And while The Time Element is 51 minutes long, Twilight Zone episodes have a running time of 25 minutes that includes all the credits. And the series was produced by Cayunga Productions, which was owned and named by Rod Serling himself. Rod Serling unfortunately died in 1975, the young age of 50 years old. He was known to smoke 3 to 4 packs of cigarettes a day and had a heart attack, and ended up dying during a risky open heart surgery. So for the first episode, we get a mild intro that doesn't include the famous Twilight Zone music. They're still working out how to intro the series. They'll change it in the subsequent episodes, before finally landing on the din 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 din. And as the title suggests, it opens with a guy by the name of Mike Ferris who has amnesia. He doesn't know where he is or who he is or why he's in this empty town, wandering around town trying to piece together clues of who he is and why this town is completely abandoned. Like an early version of Myst. And as he's wandering around this town, something looks very, very familiar. Where is this being filmed? Is this a studio lot? Because it's a gigantic studio lot. No, that can't be it. This must be filmed on location. Well, when you look it up, it's actually Courthouse Square, which you have probably seen in other movies, which is a back lot located in Universal Studios in University City, California, that has a courthouse right in the middle that we see in this episode as its centerpiece. And it's been used in just a few movies, as you can see here. I think the most famous being Back to the Future. Part 1 and Part 2, especially this courthouse. You see that in Back to the Future a lot. It is actually still used to this day. Last time it was used is the movie Maxine in 2024. Built in 1948, you could say they've got a lot of use out of this quaint, small town. So he first goes inside a diner and is yelling for people to help him. Tries to make a phone call. Nobody answers. Finds a jukebox playing and actually coffee. Still hot on the stove. Oh, someone must have been here. And this is an interesting way to kick off the series since it's a one-person monologue for the entire episode right up until the end where you get the twist. It still is a good episode, especially watching it in 2025. Seeing how things looked in the late 50s. Maybe I'm a simple man, but I like seeing the old architecture, even though it's a set. Old cars, him going to a payphone and trying to make a phone call where of course he asked for the operator. Do we still have operators nowadays? Maybe I should try that. Or do I think I'm going to get an AI voice? And he stumbles upon a mannequin store, which this is my guess. I'm guessing they're setting it up for you to think that this is some kind of nuke town, since that's what it looks like, a bit artificial, with mannequins sitting in this car right next to a store. That would completely fit the feel of the Twilight Zone. We get to see him go into a drugstore, and then I think the best part where he goes into a movie theater. He does remember one thing about his life, that he was part of the Air Force, but still, he hasn't run into anyone. We even get an early jump scare as he's running out of this movie theater and just slams into the glass. This comes out of nowhere. I gotta give them credit. There's two parts where he's either running to a glass or talking into a glass reflection of himself, and it looks absolutely pristine. They cleaned that glass very, very well, so it has that perfect shimmer, and you could totally be duped by it. And after him wandering around this town, and you wondering where is this episode going, I wouldn't say it gets boring, but it's definitely a slower paced episode. I like seeing the scenery. I think if this was shot on a different location, or this only had him wandering around the drugstore the entire time, this would be quite a boring episode. But seeing him go through this town and really being confused as you try to put the pieces together as well makes it engaging enough. But we find that he's actually an astronaut named Mike Ferris, and he's in an aircraft hangar where he's been the last 484 hours, which would be 20 days for you mathematicians out there. And this is something he volunteered to do, since they're testing to see if he can stay sane, since he's going to be cooped up in a small spaceship that's going to be going to the moon. And they're trying to figure out why he hallucinated this town. And it does seem like he's not ready to go to the moon. This guy starts freaking out and smashing the glass and yelling for him to be taken out of this virtual reality. Now you might think that they created this virtual reality for him, but actually it seems like his mind came up with it on its own. And the moral of this Rod Sterling story, as he wrote this episode, is that people need companionship. If they're just cooped up for weeks on end, they're going to get lonely, they're going to go crazy, and they're going to start apparently hallucinating small towns from Back to the Future. I feel like they could have made the isolation longer. Like, could you stand 2 weeks? I mean, I don't know. I mean, I guess if I'm in a virtual reality, I could probably stand 2 weeks. And I think I'm going to give Where Is Everybody a 6 out of 10. There's much better episodes, but I think this is a good way to kick off the series, but not exactly indicative of what we're going to see going forward. There's just too much space where not much happens. I wonder if you saw this episode premiering, I think you'd be pretty confused on what the next one's going to be like. Like, are all of them just going to be people isolated running around a town? I think this would be better to be a second or third episode. Maybe start off really strong with something like Time Enough to Last, that has more than one character, that has a good moral. That's more indicative of what the series is going to be like. So I'm tempted to give it a 5, but you can't give the first debut episode a 5, you gotta give it a 6. This episode was directed by Robert Stevens, who's the main director in the TV series Suspense, definitely an influence on the Twilight Zone, and worked with Alfred Hitchcock Presents. And he directed one more episode of the Twilight Zone. Episode 5 of Season 1, Walking Distance. Another great episode, why didn't he direct more? And the main character, and the only character for about 80% of this episode, Mike Ferris, was played by Earl Holliman, who was in my favorite 50s sci-fi movie, Forbidden Planet, as Cook. And then later in his life was in 17 episodes of the TV series Delta, as Darden. And a fun fact about this episode, talks about how Time Element was how Rod Sterling got to produce the season of the Twilight Zone. But he actually wrote another pilot titled Happy Place. And the plot was about a society that executed its citizens when they reached the age of 60. Because of their perceived obsolescence, something he will hit on in episodes like The Obsolete Man. And they mentioned that it was the plot for the movie Logan's Run. If there's ever any sci-fi movie that needs to be remade, it's Logan's Run. It's such a great idea where people reach the age of 30 and they have to be killed. And there's so many good parts to it, but it is a bit dated. So remake Logan's Run. I won't say this for almost any other sci-fi movie, but this plot was apparently too edgy for the TV censors and they rejected it. And the Twilight Zone is very good at skirting around dark subjects. And I did find a review from the New York Times about this episode when it premiered in 1959. They said Mr. Sterling conceived his playlet in imaginative terms and underscored his point that science cannot foretell what may be the effect of total isolation on a human being. Indeed, the play's situation was almost bound to be better than its resolution, which by comparison seemed trite and anticlimactic. In the desultory field of filmed half-hour drama, however, Mr. Sterling should not have much trouble in making his mark. At least his series promises to be different. They really wrote a lot differently back then, didn't they? Writing was a more high-level art than it is now. Next up on our series to review every single episode of The Twilight Zone, It's episode 2, One for the Angels, about a guy who's visited by death, and he has to try to talk his way out of the Grim Reaper taking him. Unlike the debut episode, this features tons of talking, and quite a bit of humor as well. We'll do that one in a few days. And we also have playlists of the other shows that we've covered on this channel, like Monsters, Fear Itself, Black Mirror, Tales from the Dark Side, Mystery Science Theater 3000, Cowboy Bebop, and Pet Shop of Horrors. Thanks a lot.